Hi, welcome to macronutrients, to carb or not to carb. In this module, guess what? We're talking about carbohydrates, what they are, the different types, what to eat and not eat, how much to eat, easy hacks, and our practical takeaways. So what are the basics? Carbohydrates are our body's preferred, but not only, source of energy. Our muscles, our brain, our nervous system can all use carbohydrates for energy. They provide 4 calories per gram, and we can store them. And the storage form of carbohydrates is called glycogen. Our body can store up to, and possibly a little more than 2,000 calories worth of glycogen. Primarily in the muscles, which is up to 500 grams or 2,000 calories, in the liver, up to 100 grams or 400 calories, and then in our blood, only when the liver and muscles are full. So when carbohydrates break down into glucose, that triggers the pancreas to secrete a hormone called insulin. Insulin's job is to drive that glucose into the cells so we can use it for energy. So remember, glucose is used to fuel activity in all cells of our body. Unused glucose is going to be stored either as glycogen, or if those get full, body fat. Now there is going to be one other caveat, and we're going to talk about that later on. Carbohydrates have an oxidative priority over fats, and what that means is our body prefers carbohydrate. So our carbohydrates are going to be burned preferentially for energy before our fats are. But we have to remember that any excess calories, whether it's coming from carbohydrates, protein, or fat, will lead to fat storage. So it doesn't matter what we're consuming more of. If it's more than our body needs and can use, we will store it. Now what about the flip side? What about when our blood glucose levels fall? Pancreas calls in again, this time to glucagon. So it calls upon a hormone called glucagon, which will tell the liver and the muscle to release their glycogen so that now we have blood glucose to use. And that's going to happen traditionally in a more rigorous exercise session or when you're fasting. And when you're low in glucose or glycogen chronically, your body will use protein and fat to make the energy. Typically, we'll go to fat and then protein last because we need protein for so many critical functions in the body. And we'll talk about that in the protein module. And when we use fat for fuel, that's called ketosis. And we'll be talking about the ketogenic diet and a little more about that in the fat module. So what are the types of carbohydrate? Sugar, starch, and that can be refined or whole grain, and fiber. So when we talk about fiber, fiber is not digested and used by the body. What it does is it gets into the colon undigested and it starts to ferment, and that produces what's called short chain fatty acids, which are very beneficial for our overall health and wellness because that's what fuels our colon cells. So we don't directly consume these. We have to get them in through our carbohydrate sources that have fiber in them. The only one that we do consume is butyrate. And butyrate is actually the preferred short chain fatty acid for our colon cells. And that can come from butter or ghee. 2 types of fiber are soluble and insoluble. So before we dive into a little bit more about those 2 types of fiber, is just our general recommendation. How much fiber do we need? On average, 25 to 40 grams a day. And so take that in comparison to what we actually are doing in our standard American diet. We're only taking in on average 10 to 15 grams a day. So we've got a ways to go. There's another recommendation based on the calories that we consume, which is 14 grams per 1,000 calories. I'm not a fan of that because think of the woman who wants to lose weight and she's eating 1,200 calories a day. That's going to be well below the 25 grams. So what I have seen in the evidence and the research is we really need at least 25 grams of fiber a day to do that job. So the second recommendation will not fit that bill. And I will let you know personally, I usually recommend 30 to 35 grams for women, 35 to 40 for men. Higher is not better either, because when we have too high of fiber, that can bind onto minerals and prevent their absorption. So let's look at the two fiber types. Soluble fiber will dissolve in water or body fluids. It actually creates a gel-like material that will bind to things like LDL or low density lipoprotein, the bad or lousy cholesterol. What are the sources? Comes from a lot of our plants. Some fruits like apples, oranges, and mangoes are high sources. Some vegetables, Brussels sprouts, sweet potatoes. It's going to be most prevalent in oats, oat bran, and barley. Also in legumes, nuts and seeds like chia and flax, and psyllium husk. Insoluble fiber does not dissolve in water or body fluids. It actually absorbs water, so it helps to bulk our stool. Sources are going to come from similar to the soluble, things like beans and legumes. The difference is going to be more of your whole grains in wheat bran, in wheat germ, flaxseed, berries, avocado, and coconut. So what are the benefits? In regards to soluble, where you have that gel-like compound that binds things and helps remove them from the body, it helps to reduce heart disease and diabetes risk, helps to reduce obesity and blood pressure. In regards to the insoluble, the one that absorbs the water into the colon and helps to bulk the stool, is going to be more GI related. So it helps to improve our elimination and colorectal health. So whether you battle diverticulitis, constipation, cancers, it also helps to increase our satiety. So that can also help with weight management. Now what's interesting is one thing that you wouldn't think would be related is there is an inverse relation to death from respiratory and infectious diseases. So recent studies have shown that every 10-gram increase in fiber a day has reduced mortality by 34% in men and 39% in women. So what do we eat? In the case of carbs, quality matters. What we don't want to eat. What are those pro-inflammatory carbs? Processed foods. Remember those? Long laundry list of ingredients that you cannot pronounce or identify. Sugar. And that can be any type of sugary system. So I've got a lot of clients who will ask about honey. Is that okay? It still provides sugar. Or maple syrup. It provides sugar. So whether it's sugar or honey or maple syrup or agave, those are all sugars. Sugary beverages like sodas and juices are directly linked to obesity in kids and adolescents. Any type of dessert or treat or candy that has a lot of sugar in it, basically you want to check the ingredients. Now you can look at the label as well in regards to the grams of sugar, but if you get into the ingredient list, basically anything that ends in an OSE, if it has juice or syrup in the name, that is going to be a sugar. So sugar by many, many, many names. And so when you look at the grams of sugar, keep things into perspective. Remember, our ideal is foods without labels. Those are going to have very little sugar other than your fruits. They will have natural sugar. Our goal for added sugars in a day is 25 to 38 grams a day for men and children on the low end to men on the high end. That will add up super quick if you're adding a lot of these foods that we just talked about. What else should we stay away from? The high glycemic carbs. So the ones that are very refined and processed, they're going to create high blood sugar after we eat, which activates our white blood cells to go in and create what's called AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And that's exactly what they do, is they age us, especially at the cell level. It creates endothelial damage and dysfunction, and it increases inflammation. So these are your refined processed grains, like breads, cereals, pastas, crackers. So they're going to increase those inflammatory markers that we talked about, like interleukin 6, also tumor necrosis factor A, CRP. What about artificial sweeteners? If you're trying to go low sugar, manage your weight, manage your diabetes, we start to get diet foods or low sugar foods, and they may have a lot of artificial sweeteners. Well, we have found that they disrupt our microbiome and stimulate glucose insulin release because it tricks our body to think that you're bringing sugar in when you're not. We're going to talk a lot more about these in the sweeteners module, so you'll get a lot more. But the three main that you'll see in products today are sucralose, aspartame, and acesulfame K. Now, what should we eat? What are the yes foods? What are the anti-inflammatory sources of carbohydrates? Are fruits and vegetables. You cannot beat it. That is a number one focus area when you're preparing and planning your meals, is make sure you have plenty, half of your plate worth of colorful vegetables, some fruit. So we do want to strive for 9 to 11 servings a day, which could seem like a lot, but it's 1 cup of leafy greens or raw vegetables, half a cup of cooked vegetables, or a medium size of fruit. And so you do want to strive for 3 to 4 times more vegetables than fruit, and that's because of the sugar content. So 1 serving of fruit has 3 times the amount of natural sugar as 3 servings of vegetable. That's why we want to really put our emphasis and priority on the colorful vegetables, a little bit less on the fruits. They're chock full of antioxidants, which, remember, neutralize the damage from the oxidative stress that we're exposed to. Have lots of minerals and vitamins and fiber, polyphenols and antioxidants. Our intake inversely is correlated with obesity and inflammation. So the more we consume, the lower our weight, the lower our chronic health risk, and the lower our inflammation. And legumes and beans are another great source of low inflammatory carbs, as well as actual whole grains, so non-processed whole grains. This has been shown to affect our microbiome and therefore our immune function through the short-chain fatty acid production that we talked about earlier. Also helps to reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. So whole grains are important in our diet. Doesn't need to be the mainstay, shouldn't be the full plate worth, but how I want you to remember what is a whole grain versus what is a refined grain, because I know we can get confused. Is whole grain bread, is whole wheat cereal, are those all whole grains? No. So a whole grain is the grain that is actually coming from a plant. So whether it's millet, amaranth, quinoa, wild rice, wheat, or oats, what is refined is anything that is made from a grain in a manufacturing plant. So think about like a bread or a cereal. Have you seen a bread tree? Or have you seen a cereal bush? No. Those are all made from grains, so they're refined, they're processed, and they're packaged. So that's different. So the whole grain is what we want more of, not the refined processed grains. Now how much? So how much do we eat? Do we go low carb? Do we go high carb? What's the deal? What do they say? The National Academy of Sciences, coming through the FDA, suggests everywhere from 45 to 60% of our calories. Now, what's interesting is 1/3 of their recommendations coming from the starchy, refined, processed foods, like potatoes, breads, cereals, pastas, 1/3 from fruits and vegetables. So really not enough of those phytonutrients and antioxidant chock full fruits and vegetables and whole grains. The Institute for Functional Medicine recommends 45 to 50%, but again, coming more from those yes foods that we just talked about. And then those with specific metabolic health conditions, a little bit lower, anywhere from 20 to 40% of our calories. So our caveat is insulin resistance. So it doesn't necessarily mean your glycogen stores are full. Now this is an issue. Your glycogen stores may be full, they may not be full. This is a different scenario, so this is our caveat. And more than 1 in 3 U.S. adults have been diagnosed with insulin resistance. Now the problem is 90% have it, are walking around, but have not been diagnosed. So we're going to see a time where it's 1 in every 2 individuals have insulin resistance. 30 million, have type 2 diabetes. Now, 23 of them have been diagnosed, 7 have not. That's a quarter of the amount of diabetes that we have in the United States that have not been diagnosed. So again, we're not even doing a great job of identifying, so we know, okay, we got to take hold of this and treat it. So we need to be a little more proactive in regards to getting tested and finding out if we have these, because it's very preventive, it's very reversible. So that's the good news. And our rates for diabetes have doubled from 1980 to 2014. So how does our diet and carbohydrates affect this? So if you look at this graph, you can see how quickly our blood sugar is going to jump based on what we're eating. And then how long does it hold before it falls? And so if you look at the sugar or the refined carbohydrate sources, we have that immediate spike, and then it's going to come right back down within half hour to an hour, if we're not eating a lot of other foods that can help stabilize that. So these are going to be more in just a isolated event. But think about that. If our diet is primarily sugars and refined carbohydrates, maybe we're trying to eat a non-meat based diet and follow low fat, then we're on this roller coaster all day long where our blood sugar is up and down, up and down. Every time we're up, we're making insulin. And if we're not using it, we're going to talk about the risk of what happens. But every time we drop down, guess what your body's going to ask for? More sugar and refined carbs. Because when it gets that low, physiologically, your body needs something to get it back up, because that is a nutritional stressor on the body. So that's that vicious cycle. Now, what I like to call your blood sugar stabilizers, what help to bring that blood sugar up slower and level it off for a lot longer, are your complex carbohydrates that have fiber, lots of fiber, protein and fat. You can see fat barely affects the blood sugar at all. Really helps to stabilize when we talk about blood sugar and insulin. So what's insulin resistance? On the left side, this is what should be happening. So when we eat, and especially like what we're eating, everything will make blood sugar at some point. It's just a matter of how much and how long will it last. Is we're going to make blood sugar. That stimulates the pancreas to make insulin. Insulin's job is to drive that blood sugar or glucose into our cells so we can use it for energy. So that's what you're seeing with those blue dots, is your glucose getting into the cells and being used. So that keeps our insulin and our blood sugar levels managed within the bloodstream. On the right hand side, the cell doors basically lock and close, and they're resistant. They're not going to open for the blood sugar or insulin. So your body oftentimes thinks, oh my gosh, we can't get that in. We got to make more insulin to do a job that it already can't do. So we make more insulin. It just keeps building up in the bloodstream because we can't use it. It's not able to drive the glucose into the cell. Insulin is going to store body fat if we're not using it. And that's the problem. So how do you know if you have insulin resistance? Well, you might find that that's all you want to eat. You're frequently wanting to eat sugar or carbohydrates. You have those cravings. You need to physically eat every 2 to 3 hours. You get irritable or hangry. So that's also an indication that you're in this eternal roller coaster loop. You get anxious or irritable if you go too long between meals. You should be able to last 4 to 5 hours between meals. And if you can't make it that long, that's a good indication that you've got a glucose and insulin dysregulation. You get really sleepy or calm after eating. I always love doing presentations after lunch because you can tell who's dealing with dysglycemia or insulin resistance because they're falling asleep within an hour after eating. Dramatic mood or energy swings, headaches, mood imbalances, foggy brain, and weight gain. And when that weight happens, it does tend to happen with insulin around the midsection. It can still be like you'll see your waist circumference increasing. You might see more of the love handles. You may also see more of that upper back fat, kind of that buffalo hump is often indicative of insulin resistance. So what's this trajectory? So we know that insulin resistance can lead to diabetes if it's not diagnosed and taken care of and managed well. Well, insulin resistance is a prediabetes, and it can take 10 to 15 years to finally develop. And then we have to get the testing done to confirm, yep, you have type 2 diabetes. So insulin is the first thing to go up. But guess what? We're not testing that in the doctor's office. So how do we know? We may have a lot of those symptoms. We may know that our waist is increasing, but we should get our insulin levels checked to know. And they should be less than 4. A lot of the lab values go up to 25 or above, but optimally our fasting insulin level should be 4 or below. Then we see the body fat going up, because remember, if we're not using it, we're storing it as body fat. Then our blood lipids go up, so we see our cholesterol levels are rising. And then finally, the blood sugar goes up. That is the last thing to go up, but that's when we get diagnosed with diabetes. So that's 10, 15 years down the road. So let's catch it early, be proactive, because again, we can change this whole trajectory and reverse that from even happening. So how much do we eat? We're going to be discussing the ketogenic diet and the low carb diets later in the certification in the Diet Wars section. So we'll talk more about that. Today in this module, I want to focus more on quality over quantity. What we do know is a short-term carbohydrate restriction has been found effective, but not necessarily long-term. And that's more in regards to weight loss and blood sugar regulation. Inflammatory sources of carb, sugar, refined starches, decrease. Colorful plants and fiber, increase. What are some easy hacks? So how do you get these healthy anti-inflammatory carbs into your diet without spending hours in the kitchen? You should never have to spend hours in the kitchen. You can start with a hot cereal in the morning. Organic, gluten-free. Might be buckwheat or steel-cut oats. Again, make sure it's organic and gluten-free. And add some organic berries, 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed or hemp hearts or chia seeds, rotate those, maybe some nut butter and or nuts, some protein powder, and some non-dairy milk. Super easy. And you can do it as an overnight oats. Just layer everything into a mason jar, stick it in the fridge. In the morning, just mix it up. You can eat it cold or you can heat it up if you prefer it that way. So super easy way to get that in. Buddha bowls, one of my favorites. So that's where you take a lot of leftovers that you have maybe from previous meals or things that you have in your fridge. So maybe a little bit of whole grain, some leafy greens, some colorful vegetables, a protein source, half of an avocado cut up, and some homemade salad dressing. Colorful salads, you can't go wrong. So that can be your main entree or it could be a side salad, but vary it because I know they can get really boring and people will get very tired of them and say, I don't want another salad. I've heard that in my house. And then I'll just turn around and I'll add maybe a few strawberries or maybe some pomegranate arils and maybe some pumpkin seeds or even some broccoli sprouts and some like little mini cucumbers cut up. So just something completely different than what they've seen before. And all of a sudden it's the best salad ever. So really vary it. Make sure that you're using a lot of different colors, a lot of variety in regards to what you're adding in, and change it up. So that it is something new and exciting. But adding your berries, adding your beans, you can even put a little bit of hemp hearts on there for fiber. So again, thinking of those colorful fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains, the seeds, those are going to be great sources of your fiber. Homemade soups, stews, chilies with colorful vegetables, beans, and wild rice. One of our favorite equipment tools is the pressure cookers. Holy cow, the amount of time that saves just to throw everything in raw, hit the button, and it's done in about half an hour. So super easy. And then making leftovers. So getting the glass dishes that have the lids. And then make sure to label them. We made the mistake of not labeling them. But by making the pressure cooker or crock pot meals, you have extra. And so then you can fill up dishes, put them in the refrigerator, freezer, and then you've got meals for later on. So what are our practical takeaways for today? When you are planning your meals and you're prepping your food, strive first for those colorful fruits and vegetables, more vegetables and fruit. So 3 to 4 times more vegetables and fruit, half of your plate, if not the whole plate, as your foundation, and then add everything else, your healthy fats and your proteins into that, and strive for the rainbow. Really strive to get at least 1 to 2 servings of every color of the rainbow in your day. That makes it a lot more exciting in regards to your meal satiety, and then also shopping and what your refrigerator looks like. Fiber. Fiber is key. Striving for 25 to 40 grams a day. That can come from adding in legumes, seeds, produce, and grains. You can do it as simply as just monitoring your bowel habits. If you aren't historically going to the bathroom every day, and now all of a sudden you're having really good bowel movements at least 1, if not 2 times a day, that's a really good sign that you're getting good fiber in. If you're a little more scientific and you want to truly track, go online to one of the food tracking apps and measure there, and just see, do a couple of days of a spot check and see how much you're getting in. And then focus on whole versus processed, refined starches and grains. Those are going to be the keys when we talk about carbohydrate. So see you next time for protein. Thank you.